Today we walk the land with someone who operated for years in the climate activist movement in Denmark, and by all means was pretty successful. Climate has been a strong piece on the agenda, of course not strong enough, in the Danish political system. But it also made her pretty depressed. She was, in her own words, mostly shouting in front of the parliament, until a tour visiting progressive Danish farmers exposed her to the world of regeneration, and she dove right into it. After spending a lot of time on different farms, she noticed she needed to train the next generation, as the current ag school system in Denmark, and everywhere else for that matter, doesn't really prepare you to run farms and embrace complexity. So she did the thing everyone would do in her position. She started her own school outside the free, super subsidized Danish school system, and it took off. We talk about why the next generation of farmers has to be trained by practitioners, not teachers, and why holistic context is so important and pretty scary to dive into in week 1 of your education. And why the students need to work full-time on regen farms throughout the country and bring that knowledge back into the lessons, into the classroom, which of course is on a farm. Like this, the teaching is done with real case studies on top of regen farms throughout Denmark. Bye-bye outdated textbooks, this is the cutting edge. She felt she had to get some dirt under her nails and set up a market garden which hosts a lot of activities. We end up with some very concrete calls to action and of course a mini deep dive into our role as a positive keystone species. Enjoy the walk. This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, where we learn more on how to put money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems, while making an appropriate and fair return. Welcome to another Walking the Land episode. I have the feeling I keep saying special quite a lot the last month, so everything cannot be special because then it's normal, but this is a special place to be actually, and we're going to get a bit into that as well, and we're here with Sarah. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
And we always start with a personal question. Why and how come you spend most of your waking hours, and probably potentially also your not waking hours, thinking around soil and regeneration and farming? What has been the journey into this fascinating but not easy world?
I think it comes both from a very actually depressing worldview, seeing the catastrophe around us, seeing the depleted soils, the communities in disharmony with the ecosystems around them, but also from the very hopeful and joyful experience I've only had whenever I've been myself working with farming, but also actually it was sparkled by meeting some of the progressive farmers in Denmark on a tour around the country. And so many basic realizations came to me when I was out visiting them. So for example, just the fact that it's not the same when it rains in the city as when it rains in the countryside, because in the countryside it is life-giving, it is a part of the cycle, although of course in the light of climate change rain can also be disastrous.
Too much, and
for
too
farming,
intense,
and for the soil surface, but still it's completely different. So I entered this world, and maybe as a climate activist I've spent a lot of years screaming in front of the parliament in Denmark. And then when I got out to the countryside and people started talking about plants and the living soil and animals in harmony and in the circles of life out here, I had to shut up.
And they didn't scream probably at you, right? They were talking. There was no screaming.
No screaming, but only a big humility and a big curiosity that was the only way to go.
Which is such an interesting point, because I think from the depression that the polycrisis sees, is that a word? Yes. Can give us. And many, I think, have experienced it and continue to experience, and then somehow get exposed to, and none of this is easy, obviously, in regenerative food and agriculture, but exposed to the life, the potential regeneration in some shape or form. Some people go to visit agroforestry systems somewhere, some people visit a farm nearby, some people, depends, of course, your context. And then there's no shouting, there's just a lot of hard work to be done.
Yeah.
But it has that positive potential, food and agriculture, compared to being a climate activist, which is mostly shouting and blocking roads, which is super important, getting legislation passed through, but could be very demotivating, especially the last few decades, as it didn't move and doesn't move so far as we want to.
To my opinion, there has been success to the climate movement, definitely. But I really, when I'm out in a more biodiverse landscape, when I'm out in a market garden as we're standing in right now, I'm more in contact with the world that I wish to see in the future, instead of only being in contact with or in frustration over how society is today. So it's also, to me, prefigurative for the future to be out here. And not only because we are producing food in a way that I think is the right way to do it, and is also possible to do in the decades to come, but also because it is in resistance of a system that is really not helping us doing this. The system is upholding a very destructive way of farming, but out here we are trying our best, and you really always end up with a lot of, as I said before, humility and curiosity to the processes that are working here, because they're so much greater than you. You're just out here trying to be in service of producing some food that is nutritious, and trying to create also a workspace that is nice for people to be in. And I think that is my biggest wish for this farm that I was co-starting last year, that people get out here and get more excited about the transition of the food system, because it gets so technical. And
but if we don't get excited, if you cannot see it, and how do we going to get people? We're not going to get people on board with a peer-reviewed paper.
No, exactly. And also, we have to, you might even say, seduce people.
And food is a great way. No, how do we? Let's say, the progressive movement, I don't think we've been the best in quote unquote selling good stories. And in future ones, these are things, often it was about less and often it's about quite depressing, instead of making a future that has a lot of things less and a lot of things more of, and is actually a much more desirable place, full of life as we look around us. But we haven't really been able to communicate that very clearly. It's more about who's taking away my burgers, I'm not allowed to do this anymore, etc., etc., etc. And instead of, if you come to places like this and if you taste, then suddenly it's oh, but this is more flavor, more biodiversity, more life, more insects, more water, more carbon, of course, in the soil, etc.
Exactly.
And when you, no, go ahead.
But I'm also thinking a very depressing mistake in the system right now is also that people's meat with the food is in the supermarket. They actually, when I ask people to go around the field and to identify some of the plants, they don't know how they look when they're out in the soil. So
when they're not in their plastic bag.
They're so disconnected to how food is actually grown. So I think also just enabling people to have that look on the food that they are depending on is really a big gift to me. And then I think way too many people, they are spending way too many hours sitting in offices, moving around papers. And of course, it's also nice to send emails and do coordination and stuff. There's also a lot of paperwork behind having a garden like this. But if I am to bet on what is lasting the next 100 years, I would prefer more farmers to more people only sending emails.
More people on the land and more eyes and ears and hands. And from that tour you were doing, visiting a number of the progressive farms, let's say in Denmark, then what made that shift for you? Because that could have been, okay, I continue my activism and maybe I'm going to volunteer on a market garden close to Copenhagen or somewhere, and I'm putting this in my, I don't know, free time, quote unquote, or my hobby or something. But that is not, I think, what happened. This was quite a radical shift in terms of work and life. What happened after the realization of, there's actually in the climate movement also a positive niche somewhere where people are enabling life and actually want to be there more?
I think the first thing I did was actually combining some of my climate activism by being a board member of an association called Andelsgård, so the Union of Farms, which was a union established in 2018 in Denmark. now consisting of 6 farms across the country. And there I both had to work politically with the small-scale farming movement in Denmark, but I also had to get very close to the people working on the farms, understanding their practical reality.
This was is like a body to represent future farm, or like the
Yeah,
future of farming, not the large extractive industrial ones. I'm
exactly.
imagining.
So giving a rise to a small-scale movement in Denmark that has been completely under-prioritized. Although,
like almost everywhere else, yeah.
exactly. And
Like they exist. Interesting. Like policymakers,
exactly.
there's another potential. There are many other potential scenarios except for like beyond the super intensification of even more farmland. There are farms out there. Like
Unbelievable.
But it's also yes and no, because many of these farms and farmers are pioneers, and I don't know if we can expect from the pioneering species, to stay in the metaphor of syntropic, etc., to also organize themselves and have an active voice, because they are already so busy and against all odds created farms that should not really exist if you look at the subsidy schemes and in society in general. So they did that, which is a miracle. And then do we expect them also to be like regularly in Copenhagen in the parliament discussing policy changes? I don't know if we can. It's great that we start to organize. I see many more places now. Of course, EARA, the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture, and others. We need to get a voice out there, and it needs to be organized and structured, because otherwise we're going to be out-lobbied constantly.
Definitely. The power inequality is so enormous. But that was also the idea with Andelsgaard, to bring together actually the people, both in the countryside who were not working on farms and were also distant to the farming, and also people from the cities. So the association also buys up land. Not much, but 1 hectare by 1 hectare, and then gives the opportunity to a new generation of farmers to actually start their own farms. So I was working I was part of the board there, trying to help our farmers.
One leg in the policy side and one leg on the land.
Exactly. And then one of the barriers we were facing were actually to recruit new farmers that had the skills that you need to succeed, or at least try to work with complexity and be an entrepreneur at the same time and all that stuff.
What does success look like?
Exactly.
Anyway,
you need to define that yourself. That's a very important thing.
Embrace the complexity, be able and willing to dance, yeah?
Exactly. And
because I'm imagining, sorry to interrupt, but I'm imagining, let's say, the Danish farming schools weren't or aren't, maybe, let's say the positive one in the past, teaching that necessarily. People going through that, it's not that they were ready to manage
that was exactly
systems.
My point, that we realized that the farming schools and the schools in gardening, they're not teaching any young people to be able to do a market garden or agroforestry, or at least they were not. So that led me to find another amazing woman called Sandra Willumsen, who is a farmer at Farenløse Mosteri, also 1 hour located south of Copenhagen. And together we founded the Regenerative Farming School, so a new school or educational initiative established outside the school system. And in Denmark, that's quite radical, actually, I've realized, because we are so lucky in Denmark that a part of the welfare state is also education. So that means that you get paid in Denmark to study or to go to school. And you also, of course, the school system is heavily supported by the state. So when you create a school outside the system, you have to finance it yourself, and the students have to pay to go to the school. And we then tried, because we wanted to have as many young people as possible to attend the school, to keep the fee as low as possible. And that meant that we had to do all the, to build the school ourselves as cheap as possible. And of course get very little funds, and then just put in a lot of hard work. And that was both building the facilities for the classroom, the kitchen, because it's a school organized in a way where the students sleep have 7 weeks during a season at the school, located or placed in different months. And then when they're not at the school, then they are out in a farm that they have chosen themselves. So they are doing practical work most of the time, and then they are going back to the school to get some theoretical new inspiration, but also to share their practices from the farm with the other students. So actually, It was when we had our first year in 2022 with the first group of 10 students. That was when I realized, okay, this is actually one of the most interesting places to be in Denmark right now, I would say, because this is where you are doing the knowledge sharing from the most progressive farms across Denmark. Because all the students, they were bringing back knowledge. And as you were saying before, the farmers themselves, they don't have the time to attend a lot of courses and to organize themselves because they have such a hard time working with the complex system and taking care of the system that they are managing.
Sort of the mycelium network. One of the
Exactly.
nodal points was the school
Exactly.
because everybody brought back their experience of the last weeks working on these farms and then looking for answers and solutions or just also company and then going back.
Exactly. So like what really motivates me, and I think what is the solution to some of the crises that we are facing, is to sit down with a blank paper and then really try to build up the structure that is the most relevant one and the one that seems to resonate the most with the group of people who are taking this initiative. So we really try to find a structure and also, of course, to choose the curriculum and the teachers based on some principles that we were defining. And what is also characteristic for the school is that it's only practitioners who are teaching at the school. And it means that, as I said before, the students have about 7 weeks of teaching, meaning that they have, now I have to do head math, about let's say 70 different teachers during their year, because when we are to talk about holistic grazing, then we want to find the most interesting practitioner doing holistic grazing who comes, and then it is my job as the school coordinator to make sure that the farmer is actually able to share his or her
which
knowledge.
Is not always the case, but that's a facilitation of knowledge sharing, which probably is more relevant than a shiny teacher that has spent a lot of time in a classroom.
Exactly, and that gets outdated because everything is about also reading or sensing the feedback that the system gives you and then trying to redirect afterwards. So that means that it's really relevant to have practitioners teaching because they can always bring the newest knowledge. So they are actually doing, in my opinion, a lot more interesting research than what they conduct at the universities.
Which is a big topic actually on the podcast. We haven't had so many scientists, especially from the ag universities. We've had some that left and then set up their own farms, specifically in the US, Jonathan Landgren, who we have back soon actually, who said, the research I'm able to do within the USDA is not the most cutting edge because I see on these farms, and in this case was Gabe Brown and the others, I see things that don't make sense according to my university. Yeah. So I have to leave and set up, because I need to be in service of farmers. So I will set up my own commercial farm, small, but I need to pay the bills with the farm. And then I will start doing research, like applied actual. And they're doing the most interesting research out there at the moment because they have that non-university farm perspective where it doesn't really matter what you do because there's no bills to pay at the end, and it's not applied because it's not connected to real farms. Of course, there's some exceptions, but you see quite a trend in that. Like, probably the most cutting-edge things are happening on the most progressive farms, but we don't know about it because nobody's writing papers about it unless they come somewhere and talk about it. But even there, it's not that we kept perfect data, etc. Completely understandable. But I always wish more of the researchers would go on farm, follow it, and somehow deal with the complexity, which is not easy from the scientific mind, because this is where the real innovation happens and the real relevancy, because there are so many other farms that are looking for these things and they didn't know it existed because nobody talks about it. And so how is that going? 2022, first cohort, first year, now a few years later, has it taken off? Is it in a continuum?
Like, there is a limit in the school facilities to only host 16, maximum 18 students. So that has been like the maximum for the last 3 years. And
how's the demand? Is there more than that?
Yeah, more applications than that. And what we did was also to demand that people are doing a full-time school, practice, in the farm. So instead of in order to maximize their learnings from that given season that they are at the school, they have to do it full time out at the farm. And we also insist on the school, the teaching of the school, having also the entrepreneur lessons as part of the curriculum. So we got a lot of interest also for like mid-aged people who are really interested in the regenerative movement, but who are primarily focusing on their own consumption or their own gardening in their back. And this school was like, our idea with the school was to help a new generation to enter
Farming,
and to try to learn new methods and to structure that knowledge from the, as I said, most progressive farmers. So we had to also, like, I suggested first of all that there should be an age limit to 40, and I got it was not a real shitstorm, but it was close to.
Some pushback,
because a lot of people aged above 40 really wanted to access the school. And to me, it's not at all a success criteria that we get more applications than what we can actually host. I think that's really sad. But we need to prioritize, in my opinion, the farmers, the young people who really want to enter farming, but who don't see the formal education system as a way for them. So what is really interesting is also that it has really pushed drawn the conventional farming schools in a more regenerative way in Denmark. So all the schools are now talking about it. And although it's only going to be introduced with one theme week or one lecture or whatever, I think I wouldn't have been able to contribute with the same transformation of the formal education system if I had worked from the inside. I think that's really an interesting theory of change, that you need to build up the alternative outside the system, and then you need to, in that way, show that this world is possible, and then draw the conventional.
What is it, in systems change, the 3 horizon framework, where Horizon 3, which clearly is, pulls Horizon 2 to 2 plus up to Horizon 3, and of course Horizon 1 we're shouting in front of the parliament. And all of those exist at the same time. But if you said you would have probably in 3 years would have never been able, we don't know, there's an alternative scenario entering the formal Danish farm school system and have this kind of impact, questionable, probably not.
I could have attended so many meetings.
That would have been,
and there would have been life. So many minutes and so many
quality of life. That would have been
so much time spent on just talking, and I really don't think we have time for that.
No, so create the alternative, however small, because 10, 16 farms is amazing, but actually that pulls a much bigger system when the timing is right in a direction, which means hundreds of people are influenced, not to that depth, but enough to get exposure, and they can find their way.
But it's also interesting, there is no decision has been made about how the school, the regenerative farming school, how the future of that school will be. But I think we actually got an offer to move the school to a very big place and to scale it up in a very big way. And I think what was totally clear was that was not the right way to do, because it needs to be located on a farm. It needs to be close to the practitioners who are also part of leading this movement. Another organization cannot just capture this, because it's so fragile in a way, because the community is fragile.
Yeah, and they won't show up probably if it's a massive classroom with 200 people.
Exactly.
Why would they spend their time?
You cannot create the same atmosphere. No. And also to be one of the principles in regenerative economy is also to be true to the ecosystem around you, or to the local space that you are grounded in. And I think much more the right way to scale is to copy. So that would be my dream scenario, would be that there was regenerative farming schools all over the country, instead of just one leading central school.
The central versus the decentral is always interesting. Lead us as well when you want to walk, if you want to.
Let's continue to the field.
And have these, that I think could be an indication of success in that case, that people have been able to start farms or get into farming of the original cohorts and groups.
Yeah.
Because if they all ended up in accounting, it would be a bit sad.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think partly we succeeded. Some of the former students, they have been able to start their own farms, but others have also tried and have not been able to succeed in it, because it is a really tough job to actually succeed in as a new entrepreneur. So what has, like, my motivation was 4 years ago was to create the right environment for new education. And now I'm actually more interested in like helping the new generation to actually succeed as new entrepreneurs. And that is something that I think we have a responsibility as a school, like to actually help people when they are done with the school to actually get access to land, know how to do their budget, know how to do the production plan, know where to buy their infrastructure, all that stuff.
Which de-risks and reduces the amount of failures.
Exactly.
So you mentioned entrepreneur a number of times. How, like in the Danish farming scene, or like are farms seen as enterprises or companies, and is that also seen in the school? Because sometimes, just the background of the question, in the regen, not saying the purest movement, in the regen movement, and one of the reasons we host this podcast actually, like I think we should talk about money, we should talk about entrepreneurship, and yes, we should talk about all the issues with the current money system, economic system, but it is the system we have now. And can we, even within that system, create thriving ecosystems with the tools we have? And it's a tool. And we've not been really good at using the language, nor accessing finance, nor using, let's say, the tool. And let's say the extractive industrial ag system has been really good at using the tool of finance. Is that on purpose? You're saying entrepreneurs, budgets, etc. Has it always been a fundamental piece of the school, but also of your work?
I would say that was clear when I made the first schedule of how the school calendar should be. I wanted them to be introduced not only to like the stuff that you do on the office, but actually to the framework of holistic management introduced by Alan Savory and the Savory Institute, because I really wanted the students to work with their statement of purpose and to their quality of life sentences, and to...
It's funny how many times it's been coming up this week with Fred Hansen as well. Yeah, what's your holistic context? And very interesting how people in economy are using that way beyond making a grazing plan, which is often what Alan gets credited for, but actually probably his impact will be much more...
To me, it's a mind-blowing framework to actually be able to define or investigate your core values and to set up some framework for how you want to actually define success and how you want to, what kind of production system resonates with you.
And what fits, and what doesn't fit, probably. That's also like...
Exactly.
And such an important thing for students in general, I think, at all ages, or people at all ages, to do and sit down with their partner, with their business partners, with their potential future business partners, etc.
But I introduced it in the first week of the farming school with the students, and it's also actually a bit terrifying for them to be confronted with. So I think but that is where something is like at stake. Something is poking to their inner core. Something is challenging them to say or to actually
confront things.
Yeah, both in themselves, but also in a broken system, in a broken world. And then what is always necessary is to move that realization into the action. Like, what can they do? How can they see themselves as someone with power to actually make change?
Yeah, because it can also paralyze, I think, a lot of these. But then when it gets translated into action and, okay, this is one of the paths forward, and these are paths that I'm not going to take, I think it's very empowering. Definitely,
like apathy is everywhere today, I would say. But
walking in a beautiful field, by the way, I'm just bringing people along, and a majestic tree that has been here for a while, that definitely took action when the seed hit the ground 30, 40 years ago.
Actually, this is what I love the most about this place, the old oaks, and also like all the different trees that are the most...
You see how I avoided to call the tree, because the truth is I'm from the city center and I've been on many farms, but I still don't really know the trees and the plants. And don't criticize me on that, please. But it's a majestic one. That's why I was drawn to it anyway without knowing it was an oak.
They're so majestic.
And yeah, we'll talk about the place as well. But it's sad. And then the first week, that must be quite an opener. You just...
Yeah, definitely.
Everybody knows each other's name by then, and then boom.
Exactly. But I think that is what is needed in these days. I want to talk to people and to engage people with the highest level of relevance. I think is the best way to frame it. Like
We don't have time for
I
blah,
don't
blah.
want to take anything for granted. I want to actually give people a space to also redefine themselves. Like you might have been this before you entered this school. Now you have the chance to actually state what is your new
How often do you
ambition
get
or
that
dreams.
permission, or do you take that permission from yourself to do that and to sit down and have a year and so much time with the most brilliant minds and hands in the space and other people around you to redefine there must be such a powerful moment and scary.
Definitely, like I think I see my own part in this movement as being in service of some of, maybe most of all, the generational shift. And I want to empower the new generation. So I see myself as being a facilitator of that. And that means both being able to facilitate the relevant conversations and learning space, and also to try to help them create a community in themselves or among themselves. So I don't do that blank sheet in my own life that often, although I think I'm about to.
Yeah, I was thinking actually the same, that it's the world of the podcast and everything around that, everything we do in the space probably would benefit as well to spend some time, maybe this summer, to sit down and do that again. We've done it before in certain ways, but it's good to check in and to realign.
But what this deals with is constant feeling of urgency within me. Like I really have to spend or activate all my knowledge, all the things that I have been privileged to learn and to reflect on and stuff like that, into making a more just world when it's burning around us. But I think, so it is quite challenging to me to actually say, okay, the right thing is to sit down and reflect.
We don't have time for that. Yeah.
No, but I think that is actually what we need to do.
What is it, a meditation motto? If you said, I can't sit still for 20 minutes, then probably
then you need
guru,
to
you should do it an hour.
Yeah.
And that's so true and so challenging at the same time. And then you talked about generational shift. Do you work or planning to work or want to work, or have you worked with, let's say, the generation that is handing over or is about to, in many places, Denmark, one of them, the average age of the land owner and holder and is quite high, and there's a massive generational shift in wealth, in assets, in land, in money, in all of those things, in buildings, over the next, let's say, 10 years. Have you been at all interacting with the generation that is about to hand over this in whatever way, hopefully regen way possible?
It actually happens quite often that an older farmer contacts the Regenerative Farming School and states that the farm needs a new generation to take over. And sometimes we are able to find the match. And so I have a little contact with some of them. I think what is also really important to remember is that it's not only about having a piece of land. Like if people are to not only succeed as farmers, but also to live the lives that they want to, there are so many factors that you need to take into account. So although we have a generation that might be, or some of the farmers at least, that might be able to make a better access to soil for a new generation, there is still so much work that needs to be done, and it's really hard to find the right match. But I see a willingness in some of the farmers, but some of them are also bound by culture, by generations, history, to that certain place, and then makes it really difficult for them to give up their privileges.
Yeah, which is what this is all about. your position of power and privilege, and recognizing that it's no longer fit for the world of the future, but then recognizing and action are two very different. They're close to each other, but doesn't mean that it happens. Would be good, almost like a holistic mindset, school, etc. for the current 55, like where you have a limit, but on the bottom, like you have to be over 50 or over 55 to attend instead of the other way around. Could be very interesting.
Yeah, and like my own political opinions is also that we need to be, I dare to actually say more aggressive in the redistribution of these resources in order to actually really transform the agricultural sector, because otherwise we're just actually burning out the most progressive ones and not making
long-term change. No, land ownership is probably the pink elephant, whatever color, in the room. And
yeah, but also the infrastructure, also the
processing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's the whole system that needs to
distribution channels,
to
supermarkets.
Take that responsibility.
And it's getting more concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer, which always leads to issues. Let's be honest. It only leads to some extra return for those, and then everybody else is getting squeezed at some point. And I know here on site, people are working on a soil fund, and we've interviewed a few other people around, mostly Europe, like working on land ownership, redistribution, bringing it back into the commons, how to do that and how to give the next generation access without the ownership, which is always also that very interesting, how attached are you to that, to say, this is my land, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, and are you still able to farm long term, even though you know your children are not gonna inherit it, which is that fine or not? There's a lot of cultural things to work through, but definitely possible and super needed. And so how did you end up then, because the school, like how did you end up starting the market garden here? Like, were you spending too much time in the classroom or at a computer answering or sending emails? And you thought, okay, I need to get my hands dirty, or fingernails?
It was both the wish for having more time outdoor actually, and trying myself not to work in such a academic way, but actually primarily it was because as I've been a board member, co-founding the school, I've been talking a lot about farming the past years, doing a lot of activism on farming, and I really wanted to put myself out there, not only to visit one day and then go home again, but to actually take on the burdens and also all the joys that comes with co-owning a farm. So that was what led me to try to start my own market garden together with my friend My. And we started last season. We are renting a piece of soil up here in Humlebæk. We called the farm Jordfryd in Danish, and in English it means like the holiness or the happiness of soil. And our field is both, of course, a place for growing vegetables that we sell to restaurants and canteens and to consumers in the local area. But it's also a place where I take some of my students from the Krogerup Højskole that I'm also working at. I take the students with me out there to teach them about the food system and how to do regenerative farming. And it's also a place where we host dinners out in the field, surrounded by all the greens, where people from our local community can join and have a nice summer evening. So in that way, we really try to activate or to give access to as many people as possible to this place.
And imagine you would do, maybe I've done it actually, an evening or a summer evening, which at this time of year lasts forever, basically, in terms of light. But then with a group of people from the financial sector, investors, either their own wealth or maybe pension funds or people that are in control of very powerful but potential destructive resources. And after the evening, of course, we've done a nice farm tour and we've done some fireside chat, etc. what would you like them to remember? If there's one thing, one seed you could plant in the minds of people that are, let's say, more in the financial, spending most of their time at a laptop, unfortunately, but could, nudge the world of finance. If there's one thing you want them to remember from an evening, what would that be?
I think I want the evening to be so magical, so amazing, that they cannot avoid to tell it to other people. And then it would be my task during
It's the first
visit.
one. Nobody ever said that, like, it should be so
Success
that people
is not,
share it.
Success is not like the goal for me. That's only the symptom. Like, we need to facilitate community building, to share worldviews, reflections, some of the most intense feelings, actually, both the really sad ones and also the most happy ones, like within this space. And I think what I would really feel obliged to say to them while they were visiting the place would be that this is not something that they can take for granted. This is hard work, both from people involved in it, but also from a lot of the living organisms in the soils. This food has been made by a lot of sun energy, a lot of water cycle, nutrient cycles, by a lot of hands. Like, there is not really any machines driving. This is our bodies, our hands that are doing this. And it's not to be so romantic about it, but to me it's important that people really understand that we could choose to have more of this. But right now we choose to suppress a world that looks like this. And some of it I would say out loud, and some of it I would really hope that they would be able to reflect on themselves or to know themselves when they are leaving. That this is so good that they would need more of it and would be willing to support it. And then, and maybe that's my old activist energy that comes up to me, but I try to never leave a crowd or a group of people without telling them really, like, directly how they have at least 2 or 3 different opportunities to act in a new way. So that could be, it is really important that you attend a climate march next time you get invited, or please try to support your local farmers more by showing up to next farmers market, or have you thought about asking the canteen at your workspace where you get your vegetables from? Trying to actually confront people by making it very concrete how you can take action. Because otherwise people say, oh, it's too overwhelming and the crises are everywhere and we don't know what to do. So by suggesting some different ways of acting, I'm trying to do it more realistic to people. And as soon as you have taken the first step, to me at least, it becomes almost an addiction, I would say. But to try to say, okay, how can I be more in service of this community or of this future that I really want to help?
Yeah, and I think as soon as you unseeing what is possible with food and agriculture is very difficult after you've experienced dinners at places like this, and the taste and the hard work, but also how different it looks like from, let's say, conventional fields or conventional vegetable fields, etc. And then it's very difficult to not, it's easy to suppress that, but then as soon as you start taking action, the flavors, etc., it's a sliding slope, let's say. And if we would flip the question and put you in a position of tomorrow morning you wake up and you find that you have a significant amount of money on your bank account with the obligation to put it to work. Could be very long term, doesn't have, could be partly in activism, lobbying, etc. But it's, let's say, we like to ask, what would you do with €1 billion? Not because we think anybody should have that kind of concentration of wealth, they shouldn't, but these are numbers and amounts that start to get interested in the regeneration space. And I always like to ask practitioners deep in the field, like, what would you do if it's not a lottery, but let's say it happens and you suddenly are in control of a very powerful, concentrated sunlight, basically, but concentrated resource, what would you do?
I wouldn't take any decision only on my own. I would,
I
first of
figured,
all, gather a group of people that I trust.
Gather the elders and
to share ideas. I think I would be very aware that this amount of money is not something that I have earned, or I would see it as a luck or as a coincidence that I had gained this amount. So I would say that it's not something that should fulfill my needs, be the facilitator of bringing life to others. And then I would look at the inequalities and see, okay, there's the ones with the least power is the other species, and also the new generation of farmers. And then I would try to be in service of them. And I think it would be, in practice, buying a very big area of land and a farm and trying to spend all the money on creating life for them there. And that means a lot of restoring nature areas, but also trying to host as many young people in a startup school or something. But
like
trying
a
to
farm venture studio.
but trying not to. It would be such a big honor and joy to me to see that a democracy and the community among the students would be the one kind of driving the place. Of course, there should be some ground rules, but I would really try to.
Let's not put solar panels everywhere on the fields.
Exactly, but to succeed in empowering other peoples, I think they need to be given a very big opportunity, and also with that grows automatically, I would say, a big responsibility.
And would you do that in Denmark? Would you somewhere else, or depending on your context, what draws you to
I think I would do it in Denmark because this is where my core network is, and also because this is where I feel at home, and this is where I could do the biggest change, I would say, because I already have connections and people I would reach out to. And then I would have as a criteria that everything we do should be open source. So a lot of things should be translated and hopefully be resources that others could use as well.
And it's a natural bridge to another question we like to ask. Unfortunately, you lose your investment vehicle, but you do get one wish, like a magic wand, to change one thing overnight, potentially in the food and agriculture space, but could be elsewhere. We have heard anything from global consciousness to banning factory farming and everything in between. So be as practical or as non if you want to be. But if you had the magic power to change one thing overnight, what would you change?
Like the regulative framework of this system, because it's really unfair and unethical how this system is structured. So it would be banning a lot of that is legal today, but shouldn't be it. Pesticides.
Or even that's illegal, but not followed up or at all checked or something like that.
Because I think right now it's so unfair that some of the things we know are doing such great damage
are still
to the living planet is still accessible for people or is still accepted in our culture. So I think that would be, because as soon as that, sorry my language, but shit is done, then we could try to start to build up what we want instead. But I think right now, how we are competing or how we are working is just wrong everywhere I look. So we need to try to build up the alternative, but we cannot succeed with that when we continue being against such unfair powers.
And as a final question, which often leads to other questions, but let's say potentially final question, inspired by John Kempf, who always asks, what do you believe to be true about agriculture that others don't? I like to ask it, what do you believe to be true about regenerative agriculture that others don't? Where are you, let's say, within the bubble, within the scene, a bit contrarian or thinking differently?
No, it's a good question. I don't think I'm the only one who are thinking this, but
I didn't say how are you unique. Like
No.
how are you, at least like say the common,
But I think what pops up to my mind is that we underestimate the human journey, like the mindset that people need to learn, and also all the
unlearn.
ideas that people need to unlearn in order to actually meet this complexity with honesty and with respect, and to keep working in this unfair system. Like, and I think it is true that we need to be amazed by the living organisms in the soil and the life-giving functions or qualities of all the trees that we are looking at right now, for example. But we also need to see it. Like, it's not only to actually see it in a microscope, but it's also to like actually embody it and to learn how to be grateful about it, and then following that actually act to not destruct the ecosystem, but actually try to restore and to build stronger communities. So yeah, to sum up, I think that it's really important not to underestimate the human part in the regenerative story, because a lot of my students, they actually sometimes reflect or end up in a very sad place where they think that the only good solution to this is that there are no humans inhabiting this planet. And I think we need to put ourselves in a position where we say we actually have a very important work to do, and we can actually be a very great influence to create more biodiversity. But we need to completely redefine how we are living and how we are
It's the piece of,
collabing with the other species.
we are definitely a keystone species in terms of impact, and let's say the last few hundred years or few thousand, depending on where and what context, we've been mostly a negative keystone species. But can we be a net positive one? And we see that but that feeling is very true. Many people wish themselves away, basically. But you see it actually from research as well. Like as soon as management is not there, I think just a paper came out in Japan where, of course, shrinking population, and it actually harms biodiversity in many places. Not only because of sprawling cities, but also because of abandonment and no longer being managed. And of course, managed can be many different ways. But we can absolutely have, or we should strive for, a positive, net positive, because we're always going to have negative things, a net positive impact. The choice is or the option is if we take it or not. And that's a very empowering, very scary, I think. But otherwise you go into basically the best thing to do is to reduce humanity and then everything will be fine, which apart from it, I don't think it's true. And it's also not very hopeful or active. Like it's not going to activate anybody with that message, and it's not going to get us anywhere. And when you're on a farm, like you see what you can do. We see here some fields, like versus management versus not. It's a big difference in life, in diversity, in full of life, in food, obviously. Thank you so much for a beautiful walk and talk, which is the concept of walking the land with a regenerative farmer. So much more to discuss, but that will be another time. I think we're heading for lunch.
Can I say one last thing to
you
listeners?
You can say as much as you absolutely want, yeah.
I was thinking when we walked through the forest, I proclaimed that I always tell people to do concrete action. So now I need to do the same.
Very good point, yeah.
Okay,
I should have picked up on that. Yeah.
I want all the listeners to go out and during the next half year, to actually visit a farm and to ask a lot of questions and to ask how they can help, and to actually be willing to then follow up and do some action in regards to what the response becomes. I think we really need to build stronger alliance and stronger relations between the farmers and all the people who are part of this network, because they are so important. But we need to start with going out to the field. Like you cannot make your conclusions from your
spreadsheet.
Computer.
You cannot be a spreadsheet farmer.
No.
And it's such an important piece. And when you go, just an add-on piece of advice, ask a lot of questions and listen intensively and deeply, and be humble and be ready, especially if you visit the more progressive ones, that a lot of things you thought, even if you've been listening for this podcast for a long time, but still, you thought about food and agriculture might be slightly different or more nuanced. For sure, they're more nuanced, but also very like ideas of native species and weeds and the role of animals and the role of humans and the role of technology and the role of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You might be in for some surprises, and be ready for that. Spend some quality time. Don't go an hour or two, like actually, and yes, ask, how can I help? And it could be volunteering, could be donating, could be organizing things, could be investing, could be anything, because these pioneers need community, and
There's no
we need to show
fix.
up. There's no quick fix. And
Enjoy it.
enjoy. It's probably the best. Everybody, not everybody, most people enjoy visiting these kind of places because I don't know, it's a very deep, innate thing. We like to see places full of life, I think, which is still the best slogan. And Wild Farm did an amazing job with full of life. And these places are full of life. And you can see it, smell it, hear it. You heard the birds today, and the insects, and the forests. The weather helps as well today.
Now we're longing for rain.
Yeah, of course. There's always this pendulum that swings, interestingly, yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end. For show notes and links discussed, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend? And get in touch with us on social media, our website, or via the Spotify app, and tell us what you liked most. And give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your podcast player. That really, really helps us. Thanks again, and see you next time.